The rain had stopped just before the burial, which felt appropriate somehow. Even the weather couldn't fully commit to mourning Eleanor Marie Thompson. I stood at the graveside, slightly apart from the cluster of relatives gathered around the mahogany casket, and watched as they lowered my mother into the ground next to my father, who'd been waiting for her there for 15 years. 15 years. Had it really been that long since Dad died? I tried to remember his face, his voice, but time had worn the memories smooth like river stones. What I remembered most clearly was the way he'd looked at me sometimes, with a sadness that I'd never understood as a child. Now, standing here in my ill-fitting suit that I'd bought at a discount store 3 years ago, I wondered if he'd known, if he'd seen what was coming. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, the priest intoned, his voice carrying across the cemetery. A few people wept. My brother Daniel stood front and center, his hand over his heart, his expression perfectly arranged into grief. He'd probably practiced it in the mirror. I felt nothing. No grief, no relief, no sense of closure. Just a hollow emptiness where maternal love should have lived. After the burial, everyone drove to the funeral reception hall that the funeral home had arranged. It was one of those generic spaces designed for grief. Beige walls, uncomfortable chairs, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look vaguely ill. Tables had been set up with food nobody would eat and coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since morning. I stood in the back corner of the room, nursing a glass of cheap wine that tasted like vinegar and regret. Around me, relatives I barely recognized anymore circulated like well-dressed vultures, their voices a constant hum of practiced sympathy and thinly veiled curiosity about the will. Such a tragedy, Aunt Margaret was saying to a cluster of distant cousins near the buffet table. But at least she had Daniel. He was always so devoted to her, visited every Sunday without fail. Daniel, my brother, the golden child, the heir apparent, the one who could do no wrong in our mother's eyes. And then there was me. The afterthought. The disappointment. The one whose name was only mentioned when comparisons needed to be made. I took another sip of the terrible wine and watched as Daniel worked the room with the ease of a politician, shaking hands, accepting condolences, playing the role of the grieving son to perfection. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, his dark hair perfectly styled, his expression a masterclass in controlled emotion. "I can't believe you actually came," a voice said beside me. I turned to find my cousin Rachel, one of the few family members who had ever treated me like a human being. She held her own glass of wine and wore an expression that suggested she found this whole circus as distasteful as I did. "She was still my mother," I said quietly. "Was she, though?" Rachel raised an eyebrow. "When's the last time she called you, invited you for dinner, acknowledged your existence?" I didn't answer because we both knew the truth. 3 years. It had been 3 years since my mother and I had last spoken, and that conversation had ended with her telling me that I was wasting my life because I had chosen to become a teacher instead of following Daniel into the family investment firm. "You should have been a lawyer like your brother wanted," she had said, her voice cold and distant over the phone. "You always did lack ambition." The fact that Daniel wasn't actually a lawyer, but rather a middle manager who coasted on our mother's connections and money had been conveniently overlooked, as always. But the real pain went back much further than 3 years. It went back to every parent-teacher conference where she'd sighed and asked why I couldn't be more like Daniel. To every birthday where his presents were carefully selected while mine were clearly afterthoughts. To every school play where she'd arrive late, if she arrived at all, checking her watch impatiently through my performances. I remembered being 10 years old, coming home with an award for the best essay in my grade. I'd been so proud, clutching that certificate with both hands, practically running through the front door to show her. She'd been in the living room with Daniel, admiring his report card. All A's, she'd been saying. Perfect marks. "Mom, look," I'd shouted, waving my certificate. "I won, out of all the 5th graders." She'd glanced at it briefly. "That's nice, Michael. Put it on the refrigerator." Then she'd turned back to Daniel. "We should celebrate your report card. How about we go out for dinner, just you and me?" I'd stood there, certificate dangling from my hand, watching them leave. The paper had gone in the trash, not on the refrigerator. What was the point? Or the time I was 12 and had stayed up all night building a model of the solar system for the science fair. I'd used every bit of allowance I'd saved to buy the materials. The planets hung from fishing line, painted in careful detail, each one to scale. I'd even made little information cards about each planet's composition and orbital period. "It's good," she'd said when I showed her, "but Daniel won first place in the science fair when he was your age. Are you sure this is your best work?" Daniel had won first place with a volcano that their mother had clearly made for him, but pointing that out would have been making excuses and not taking responsibility for my own shortcomings. The memories stacked up like weights, pressing down on my chest. Every dismissal, every comparison, every time she'd looked at me and found me wanting. And the worst part? I'd spent years trying to figure out what was wrong with me. Why wasn't I enough? What essential piece was I missing that made me so fundamentally unlovable to my own mother? "They're about to read the will," Rachel said, nodding toward the front of the room where Harold Finch, the family attorney, was setting up a small podium. "This should be interesting." "Interesting isn't the word I'd use," I muttered. We moved closer as Harold cleared his throat and adjusted his reading glasses. The room gradually fell silent, all eyes turning toward the thin, gray-haired man who had been handling our family's legal affairs for over 30 years. "Thank you all for being here today," Harold began, his voice formal and measured. "As you know, I'm here to execute the last will and testament of Eleanor Marie Thompson, as per her wishes dated March 15th of this year. March. She had updated her will just 6 months before she died. 6 months before the cancer finally took her. 6 months before she'd called me for what would be the last time, her voice weak and raspy, saying only, 'Michael, I need to tell you something.' But then Daniel had walked into her hospital room and she'd said, 'Never mind, I'll talk to you later.' Later never came. Eleanor was very clear about her intentions," Harold continued, and I noticed him glance briefly in my direction before looking away. Was that pity in his eyes, or discomfort? She wanted to ensure that her legacy would be preserved, and her estate would go to the person she felt was best suited to carry on the family name and traditions. Of course. Daniel. It would all go to Daniel. I'd known this was coming, had prepared myself for it, but preparation didn't make the reality any easier to swallow. Aunt Margaret was standing near the front, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue even though she'd never particularly liked my mother. Uncle Robert was checking his phone, probably calculating what his share of emotional support to Daniel would be worth. Cousin Jennifer was already moving toward Daniel, ready to be the first to offer congratulations. The whole thing was choreographed, rehearsed, a performance of family unity that meant nothing. I felt Rachel's hand squeeze my arm sympathetically. "Therefore," Harold said, his voice ringing out across the now silent room, "it is my duty to inform you that Eleanor has left the entirety of her estate, including the family home, all financial assets, investment portfolios, and personal property, to her son, Daniel Marcus Thompson." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading outward through the room. Someone started clapping, Uncle Robert naturally, and others joined in, a polite smattering of applause for Daniel's good fortune. The room erupted in a mixture of congratulations directed at Daniel and sympathetic looks directed at me. I stood there, frozen, as my brother's face split into a smile that he tried and failed to make look humble. "Thank you, everyone," Daniel said, stepping forward to shake Harold's hand. This is overwhelming. I want you all to know that I understand the responsibility that comes with this inheritance." "We know you'll do right by the family, Daniel," Aunt Margaret gushed. "Your mother always said you had such a good head for business. She wanted to make sure the family business stayed in capable hands," Daniel announced to the room, loud enough for everyone to hear. Loud enough for me to hear. I promised to honor her legacy and everything she built. Everything she built. Our grandfather had built the modest investment firm. Our father had expanded it before his sudden death from a heart attack. Daniel had simply shown up and let his name do the work while collecting a paycheck and taking credit for other people's successes. "Is there anything?" Rachel whispered to me. "Anything at all?" I shook my head. I had expected this, of course. But expecting humiliation and experiencing it were two very different things. "And now," Harold continued, "if I may detail the specific assets of the estate." Harold was still speaking, listing out the various assets and their values with the dry precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. The primary residence, valued at $2.1 million. Investment account with Fidelity, current balance of $1.7 million. The stock portfolio, diversified holdings currently valued at approximately $900,000. Municipal bonds were $350,000. The art collection, appraised at $500,000. Mrs. Thompson's jewelry, including the sapphire set inherited from her mother and the diamond pieces purchased over the years, valued at approximately $200,000. And finally, the contents of the safe deposit box, which include various important documents and personal items. Each number was another dagger. The total sum of my worth to my mother, 0. The total sum of what I'd meant to her, nothing. There are also, Harold continued, several smaller bequests. To the church, $10,000. To the animal shelter, $5,000. To her cleaning lady of 20 years, Maria Gonzalez, $5,000. Even Maria, the cleaning lady, had meant more to my mother than I had. I was about to leave, to walk out of that room with what little dignity I had left, when I noticed a man in a dark suit standing near the doorway. He wasn't one of the relatives or family friends. He stood out because he wasn't socializing, wasn't eating from the buffet, wasn't doing anything except watching me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. He was tall, probably in his mid-50s, with silver gray hair cut short and precise. His suit was expensive, but understated, the kind that didn't call attention to itself. He held a leather briefcase in one hand. Everything about him screamed professional, deliberate, purposeful. As people began to disperse, moving toward Daniel to offer their congratulations and curry favor with the new heir, the man in the suit began walking in my direction. He moved with purpose, weaving between clusters of relatives, his eyes never leaving mine. Several people tried to intercept him, curious about who this stranger was, but he politely sidestepped them all. Aunt Margaret actually grabbed his arm, saying something I couldn't hear, but he gently extracted himself and continued toward me. My heart started beating faster. Something about this felt significant, though I couldn't say why. "Excuse me," he said when he reached me, his voice low and careful. "Professional." "Are you Michael Thompson?" "I am," I said, suddenly wary. "Who are you?" "My name is James Carver." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a plain manila envelope, the kind you could buy at any office supply store. Nothing special about it except the weight. It hung heavy in his hand. "Your mother asked me to give you this personally after the will was read. She was very specific about the timing." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "What is this?" "I was asked not to discuss the contents," James said. His face was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. "Only to deliver it to you, alone. That was her instruction. She was quite insistent about it." I stared at the envelope like it might bite me. My mother had left me something after all. But why this way? Why not just include it in the will? The room around us had begun to buzz with conversation again, but I felt several pairs of eyes watching our exchange, including Daniel's. My brother's smile had faded, replaced by a look of confusion and something else, something that might have been concern or fear. Across the room, Uncle Robert was craning his neck to see what was happening. Aunt Margaret had her hand over her mouth, whispering to Cousin Jennifer. Even Harold Finch, still standing by his podium, was watching with an expression of bewilderment. I took the envelope. It was heavier than I expected, something solid inside, something that wasn't just papers. "I'm sorry for your loss," James said, and then he turned and walked away, disappearing through the doorway before I could ask any more questions. He moved quickly, like a man who had completed his mission and wanted to be gone before complications arose. "Wait!" I called after him, but he was already gone. I started to follow, but Rachel caught my arm. "Let him go," she said quietly. "Whatever's in that envelope, your mother wanted you to have it. That's what matters." "What was that about?" Daniel's voice came from behind me. I turned to find him standing there, flanked by Aunt Margaret and Uncle Robert. His earlier smugness had evaporated, replaced by suspicion. "Who was that man?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "What did he give you?" Uncle Robert demanded, eyeing the envelope in my hands. That's my business." "Everything concerning this family's affairs is our business," Aunt Margaret said primly, "especially if it relates to Eleanor's estate. If there's another document, another addendum to the will." "It's not your concern," Rachel interjected, stepping between them and me. "This was given to Michael personally. Whatever it is, it's his." Daniel was staring at the envelope like it was a bomb. "Mom never mentioned anything about this to me. She told me everything. I was with her almost every day in the hospital." "Apparently not everything," I said. "What was that about?" Rachel asked, appearing at my elbow again. "I have no idea." "Well, open it." I looked around the room. Too many people, too many eyes. "Not here. Let's go outside." We slipped out through the side door into the funeral home's small garden. It was late October, and the air had that crisp bite that promised winter was coming. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. I sat down on a stone bench and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph, slightly yellowed with age, printed on the kind of thick paper they used to use decades ago. The image showed a newborn baby wrapped in a blue blanket, lying in what looked like a hospital bassinet. The baby's eyes were closed, tiny fists curled up near its face. Someone had written a date on the white border at the bottom. May 3rd, 1987. "That's around when Daniel was born, isn't it?" Rachel asked, leaning over my shoulder to look. 2 months before," I said, my mind racing. Daniel's birthday was July 7th. I knew because our mother had always made a big production of it, throwing elaborate parties while my own birthday passed with barely a card. I turned the photograph over. On the back, written in my mother's distinctive handwriting, were 5 words that made my blood run cold. Ask him who he really is. Ask who? Rachel breathed. Daniel? I stood up abruptly, the photograph clutched in my hand. Through the window, I could see the reception still going on, could see Daniel holding court in the center of the room, basking in his inheritance and his victory. I need to talk to him, I said. Michael, wait. Rachel started, but I was already moving. I pushed back through the door, crossed the room with determined strides, and grabbed Daniel's arm, pulling him away from the group of relatives he'd been entertaining with some story about our mother's final days. Hey, what the hell? Daniel started, but I cut him off. We need to talk. Now, in private. Something in my expression must have convinced him because he followed me without further protest. I led him to a small side room that the funeral home used for private family consultations. Rachel slipped in behind us before I could close the door. What's this about? Daniel demanded, his earlier confidence giving way to irritation. If you're here to contest the will, you're wasting your time. Mom made her choice. Who are you? I asked, holding up the photograph. Daniel's face went pale. Actually pale. The color drained from his cheeks as his eyes fixed on the image in my hand. Where did you get that? His voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Mom had someone give it to me, after the will was read. She wanted me to have it. She wanted me to ask you who you really are. I stepped closer to him. So I'm asking, who the hell are you, Daniel? I'm your brother, he said, but there was no conviction in his words. Are you? I turned the photograph around so he could see the back, see our mother's handwriting. Because this baby isn't you, is it? This baby was photographed 2 months before you were supposedly born. So who is this? Daniel's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He looked like a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. Daniel, Rachel said quietly, what's going on? He sat down heavily in one of the chairs, his head in his hands. I don't know. I mean, I knew something was off, but I never wanted to ask questions. What do you mean you knew something was off? I demanded. He looked up at me, and for the first time in our lives, I saw genuine fear in my brother's eyes. Little things that never quite added up. I don't have baby pictures from the hospital. Mom always said they were lost in a move, but we never moved. My birth certificate. I saw it once when I was applying for my passport. There was something weird about it. It looked newer than it should have been. And what? She told me once when she'd had too much to drink that I needed to be grateful, that she'd given me everything, that I owed her for the life she'd provided. Daniel's hands were shaking. She said, You weren't meant to be ours, but I made you ours anyway. The room fell silent except for the distant murmur of conversation from the reception. I need to find that man, I said. The one who gave me this, James Carver. He knows something. I left Daniel sitting there and went back to the main room, scanning for James, but he was gone. Of course he was gone. I asked Harold Finch if he knew who James Carver was, but the attorney just shook his head, saying he'd never seen the man before. I spent the next week trying to track down James Carver. I called every private investigation firm in the city. I searched online. I asked every mutual contact I could think of. Nothing. It was like the man didn't exist. The first day after the funeral, I started with the obvious places. I Googled James Carver Private Investigator and got hundreds of results, none of them matching the man I'd met. I tried adding our city, our state, different combinations of keywords. Nothing. I called the first private investigation firm alphabetically listed in the yellow pages. Yes, I still had a phone book. When you're a teacher on a modest salary, you learn to use all available resources. Carver Investigations, a woman answered. My heart jumped. Hello, I'm looking for James Carver. This is Carver Investigations, but there's no James here. Owner's name is Patricia Carver. Can I help you with something? Another dead end. I tried the second firm and the third. By the 20th call, I'd developed a script. And hi, I'm trying to locate a private investigator named James Carver. Mid-50s, silver hair, worked on a case involving my family. Each time, the answer was the same. Never heard of him. No one by that name in their network. Sorry, can't help you. On day 3, I tried a different approach. I went back to the funeral home and asked to speak with the manager, a sympathetic middle-aged woman named Mrs. Chen. I'm trying to find someone who attended my mother's funeral reception last week, I explained. A man in a dark suit. He would have come in specifically to deliver something to me. Mrs. Chen checked her records. We had 83 people sign the guest book. Was his name in there? I scanned the list. No James Carver, no J. Carver. No one with initials JC either. He might not have signed in, I said. Would you have any security footage? We keep footage for 30 days, but... She looked uncomfortable. We don't generally share it without a police investigation. Privacy concerns, you understand? I understood. Another dead end. Daniel, meanwhile, had gone silent. He didn't answer my calls or respond to my messages. When I drove by the house, our mother's house, now his house, on day 5, I saw him through the window, sitting in the dark living room, surrounded by boxes he hadn't bothered to unpack. The house looked dead, lifeless. None of the lights were on except for the lamp next to him. I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Daniel, I know you're in there. We need to talk. Nothing. But I saw the curtain move slightly, saw a shadow shift. He was avoiding me. On day 6, I called Harold Finch's office. Mr. Finch is with a client, his secretary said. Can I take a message? Tell him Michael Thompson called. I need to ask him about James Carver. She put me on hold. When she came back, her voice was different, colder. Mr. Finch says he doesn't know anyone by that name. He suggests if you have questions about the will, you should retain your own attorney. So Harold was stonewalling me, too. It was Rachel who finally found the lead we needed. She showed up at my apartment on day 7, a Tuesday evening, carrying a cardboard box and wearing an expression that was equal parts excitement and apprehension. I went through Mom's old address books, she told me, setting the box on my kitchen table. The ones from the 80s, I found them in the attic of my parents' house. Mom saved everything from when she and Eleanor were close before the big family feud. I'd forgotten that Rachel's mother and mine had been sisters, close once before something had driven them apart. Rachel had never told me what caused the rift, and I'd never asked. And, I prompted, opening the box. It was full of old day planners, address books with cracked leather covers, spiral notebooks with yellowed pages. There's a name that keeps appearing in the month before Daniel's birthday, Dr. Patricia Holloway. She was an obstetrician, but not the one Mom claimed delivered Daniel. My hands froze on one of the address books. Do you have contact information? Better. I called the Medical Licensing Board. She retired 15 years ago, but she's still alive. Lives in a nursing home about an hour from here. Meadowbrook Senior Living Center. Rachel pulled out her phone and showed me the address. I already called ahead. She's willing to talk to you. I told her it was about Eleanor Thompson and something that happened in 1987. She went quiet for a moment, and then she said, I've been expecting this call for 30 years. The drive to Meadowbrook felt like it took both an hour and no time at all. Rachel came with me, navigating while I drove, both of us barely speaking. What was there to say? We were about to uncover secrets that my mother had taken great pains to bury. The Meadowbrook Senior Living Center was a sprawling facility with manicured grounds and a staff that seemed genuinely caring. A nurse named Sandra met us at the entrance and led us through hallways decorated with cheerful art, and the kind of motivational posters that made me think someone in administration had read too many self-help books. Dr. Holloway is in the sunroom, Sandra said. She's been waiting for you. She asked me to bring her down an hour ago, said she wanted to be ready. The sunroom was beautiful, all windows and natural light, with comfortable chairs arranged around small tables, plants hung from the ceiling, and a parakeet chirped in a cage by the window. It should have felt peaceful, but my heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone in the room could hear it. Dr. Patricia Holloway sat in a wheelchair, looking out at the garden. She was small and frail, probably no more than 90 pounds, her hair white and thin. But when she turned to look at me, her eyes were sharp and clear, the kind of eyes that missed nothing. You're Michael, she said. It wasn't a question. You look just like your father. Same eyes. Same set to your jaw. Thomas was a good man. Your mother never deserved him. I sat down in the chair across from her. Rachel took a seat slightly behind me, giving us space but staying close enough to offer support. Dr. Holloway, I need to ask you about my mother, about something that happened in 1987. She nodded slowly, her thin hands folding in her lap. I wondered if this day would ever come. Your mother made me promise never to speak of it, but she's gone now, and you deserve to know the truth. She paused, her eyes distant, as if seeing into the past. I've carried this secret for 36 years. It's been eating at me. Maybe now I can have some peace. What truth? My voice came out rougher than I intended. Dr. Holloway took a deep breath. Your mother came to me in the spring of 1987. She was desperate. She'd been trying to have another child for years, but she couldn't. Complications from your birth had made it impossible. But she wanted another son. She needed another son, she said. someone who could be everything she'd planned for. The words hit me like physical blows. What are you saying? She asked me to help her adopt a baby. Privately. Illegally, though we didn't use that word. She had the money and the connections. There was a young woman, barely 18, who'd gotten pregnant and couldn't keep the child. She was from out of state, no family support. Your mother offered her a significant sum of money, $50,000, which was a fortune to a girl in her situation. The photograph. The baby in the photograph. The baby was healthy, perfect. Your mother took him home that same day. She disappeared for 2 months, told everyone she was visiting relatives out of state. When she came back, she had a newborn baby and a birth certificate that said she'd given birth to him in July. She named him Daniel. I felt like I was going to be sick. My stomach churned, and the room seemed to tilt. That's illegal. It was illegal, Dr. Holloway agreed, her voice heavy with regret. But your mother was persuasive and wealthy. She made sure everyone involved was compensated for their silence. Including me, I'm ashamed to say. She looked down at her hands. I told myself I was helping a desperate woman become a mother. I told myself that the baby would have a better life with your mother than with an 18-year-old girl who could barely support herself. But I knew it was wrong. I've known it was wrong for 36 years. It's haunted every day of my retirement. Why? I asked, and my voice broke. Why would she do this? She already had me. Dr. Holloway's expression turned sad, lines deepening around her eyes and mouth. Because you weren't what she wanted, Michael. You were too sensitive, too artistic, too much like your father. You cried when you saw hurt animals. You drew pictures instead of playing sports. You asked questions about feelings and fairness instead of money and success. She wanted a son she could mold into her vision of what a Thompson should be. Daniel was that blank slate, a newborn she could shape from the beginning, with no influence from your father, no inconvenient personality traits to work around. The words kept coming, each one adding to the crushing weight on my chest. She told me that? Not in those exact words, but yes, she said. Dr. Holloway closed her eyes, remembering. She said, Michael is too much like Thomas, soft, impractical. I need a son who will carry on the family legacy, someone strong and ruthless like my father was, someone who won't waste time on poetry and pictures. Those were her actual words. I remember because they shocked me. What mother talks about her own child that way? What about the girl? Rachel asked quietly from behind me. The birth mother? Dr. Holloway turned to her. I often wondered about her. 17 years old, scared, alone. Your mother told her the baby would go to a good family, would have opportunities she could never provide. The girl cried when she handed him over, but she signed the papers. She took the money because she needed it desperately. Your mother made her sign an agreement that she would never try to contact the child or reveal the adoption. Legally, that agreement meant nothing, but the girl didn't know that. Do you remember her name? I asked. Sarah Parker. She was from Iowa, I think, or maybe Illinois, somewhere in the Midwest. She'd come here for college, gotten pregnant by a boyfriend who disappeared when she told him. She was planning to drop out, go back home in disgrace. The money your mother gave her allowed her to finish school. I'd like to think she went on to have a good life, but I don't know. I never saw her again after that day in May. Sarah Parker. Christopher's birth mother. Daniel's birth mother. The woman whose son had been stolen from her through a combination of desperation and manipulation. I don't understand, I said. If Mom wanted Daniel so badly, why did she still treat me like I existed? Why not just get rid of me somehow? Send me to boarding school or give me up for adoption too? Dr. Holloway's laugh was bitter. Because you were her biological son. Her blood. She couldn't get rid of you without people asking questions. And there was her pride. She'd given birth to you, even if you disappointed her. You were proof she could conceive. Daniel was supposed to complement you, to be everything you weren't. She wanted 2 sons, one who carried the bloodline and one who carried the legacy. She just never expected you to be the one with integrity. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, through the large windows, I could see residents walking in the garden, living their quiet lives, unaware of the bomb that had just exploded in mine. Is there anything else? I finally asked. Anything that might help me prove what happened? Dr. Holloway wheeled herself over to a small desk in the corner of the sunroom. She opened a drawer and pulled out a manila folder, similar to the envelope James Carver had given me. I kept copies of everything. I told myself it was for legal protection, but really, I think I knew this day would come. Your mother was so confident that money could buy silence forever, but silence has a way of becoming unbearable. She handed me the folder. Inside were photocopies of documents, a birth certificate for Christopher James Parker, Born May 3rd, 1987. Mother Sarah Parker. Father unknown. A receipt for $50,000, signed by Sarah Parker. Medical records showing Eleanor Thompson had been treated for complications that made pregnancy impossible after 1983. Letters between my mother and Dr. Holloway discussing the arrangement. I couldn't find words. This is evidence of fraud. Multiple felonies. Yes, Dr. Holloway said simply. I'm 87 years old, Michael. I've lived with this guilt long enough. If there are legal consequences for me now, I'll accept them. But you needed to know the truth. I stood up, needing to move, needing to do something with the rage building inside me. The rage at my mother, at this entire situation, at 36 years of lies. So she just created a replacement son, made him the favorite, gave him everything while treating me like I was defective. I'm sorry, Dr. Holloway said. I'm so very sorry. If it helps, I don't think she was happy. She called me once, maybe 10 years ago. I was already retired, living in Florida at the time. She'd somehow tracked down my number. She was drunk, I think. Her words were slurred. She said she'd made a mistake, that she'd tried so hard to create the perfect son that she'd destroyed the real one. She'd lost you, and Daniel had become someone she didn't recognize, entitled hollow. Everything she'd given him had made him weak instead of strong. She said, I gave him everything except a reason to earn anything, and I gave Michael nothing except reasons to be strong. I got it all backwards. I thought about Daniel sitting in that dark house, surrounded by his inheritance, looking lost and afraid. She never told him? Not that I know of. She asked me that night, in that drunken call, if she should tell him the truth. I said yes. She needed to tell both of you. She said she would when she was ready. But she never called me again. I assume she never found that courage. Until the photograph, Rachel said. Until the photograph, Dr. Holloway agreed. I suppose that was her way of telling the truth without having to face the consequences directly. Typical Eleanor. Always taking the path that protected her from discomfort. We left Meadowbrook with the folder of documents, my mind reeling. In the car, Rachel drove while I sat in the passenger seat, staring at the photocopies, reading them over and over, trying to make them feel real. What are you going to do? Rachel finally asked. I don't know. I need to talk to Daniel. Really talk to him this time. He needs to see these documents. When we arrived at the house, it was past 8 in the evening. The windows were dark except for that same lamp in the living room. I walked up to the front door and knocked, then pounded, then used my key, the spare key my father had given me years ago, which my mother had never bothered to ask for back. The house smelled stale, like someone had been living on takeout and neglect. Dirty dishes were stacked in the kitchen. Mail was piled everywhere. The pristine showcase our mother had maintained had transformed into something that looked like a depression nest. Daniel, I called out. I know you're here. We need to talk. Now. I found him in the study, our father's old study, sitting in the dark with a bottle of whiskey and a glass. He looked terrible, unshaven, wearing the same clothes I'd seen him in days earlier, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. Go away, Michael, he said, but there was no fight in his voice. Just go away. I know the truth, I told him, stepping into the room. Rachel hung back in the doorway. All of it. You were adopted, or illegally. Mom bought you from a teenage mother and created a fake birth certificate. Daniel didn't react with surprise. He just nodded slowly, taking another drink. I found documents, he said, his words slightly slurred. After you showed me the photograph, I started looking through Mom's papers. Her old safe deposit box. The key was in her jewelry box. There's a file, medical records, payment receipts, correspondence with lawyers. She kept everything, like she wanted someone to find it eventually. Or maybe she was just pathologically organized about her crimes. Why didn't you tell me? I sat down in the chair across from him. Because, he laughed bitterly, the sound raw and broken. Because I didn't want it to be true. Because it meant my entire life was a lie. I'm not a Thompson, I'm nobody, just some kid she bought to replace the son she didn't want. You know what the worst part is? What? I remember her telling me when I was maybe 7 or 8 that I was special, that I was chosen. I thought she meant I was her favorite, her chosen one. But she literally meant chosen. Selected? Purchased. Like you'd choose a puppy from a litter. He poured another drink, his hand shaking so badly that whiskey sloshed onto the desk. My entire identity is a lie. Daniel Marcus Thompson. She made it up. My birth mother named me something else. Christopher James Parker. That was my name. For about 10 hours before Mom took me and erased Christopher Parker from existence. I pulled out the folder from Dr. Holloway. I went to see the doctor who delivered you. She kept copies of everything. The real birth certificate, the payment records, the letters, it's all here. Daniel took the folder with trembling hands and started reading. I watched his face cycle through emotions: shock, horror, anger, grief. When he got to the copy of his real birth certificate, he started crying. Not the quiet, dignified tears of a funeral. Gut-wrenching sobs that shook his whole body. Christopher James Parker, he read aloud between sobs. That's who I am. That's who I was supposed to be. And she took that away from me. She took my name, my identity, my history, and for what? So she could have the perfect son? So she could mold me into some fantasy version of her dead father? Daniel. Christopher, he interrupted fiercely. My name is Christopher. Or it should have been. Or it was, for 10 hours. Before she decided I was going to be Daniel instead. God, I don't even know who I am anymore. We sat in silence for a long moment, the only sound his ragged breathing as he tried to compose himself. There's more, I said quietly. The doctor gave me information about your birth mother. Her name was Sarah Parker. She was 17, from the Midwest. Mom paid her $50,000 and made her sign an agreement saying she'd never contact you. Christopher, because that was who he was now, who he needed to be, looked up at me with devastated eyes. She's alive? The doctor thinks so. She didn't have any information about what happened to her after 1987, but there's no reason to think she's not out there somewhere. If you want to find her, I don't know what I want. He set down his glass, pushed the whiskey bottle away. My whole life, I thought I knew exactly who I was. Daniel Thompson, heir to the family fortune, the golden child. Every decision I made, every path I chose, it was all based on that identity. But it was all built on lies. So who am I really? What do I want? I don't know anymore. You're someone who deserves to know the truth, I said. You're someone who deserves to make choices based on reality, not fiction. And yeah, that's scary. I get it. But it's also freedom. You don't have to be who she wanted you to be anymore. Neither do you, he pointed out. No, I agreed. Neither of us do. She left me that photograph, I said. She wanted me to find out the truth. Why? Maybe, Dr. Holloway said quietly, she wanted you to know that you were the real son all along, that you were enough, that you had always been enough. I left Meadowbrook with my mind reeling. I drove straight to the house, our mother's house, and pounded on the door until Daniel answered. He looked terrible, unshaven, wearing the same clothes I'd seen him in days earlier. We need to talk, I said. He let me in without argument. The house was a mess, nothing like the pristine showplace our mother had kept it. Boxes were everywhere, mail piled up on the hall table, dishes stacked in the sink. We sat in the living room where we'd spent so many childhood evenings, me doing homework at the coffee table while our mother praised Daniel for breathing. I know the truth, I told him. All of it. You were adopted, illegally. Mom bought you from a teenage mother and created a fake birth certificate. Daniel didn't react with surprise. He just nodded slowly. I found documents, he said. After you showed me the photograph, I started looking through Mom's papers, her old safe deposit box. There's a file, medical records, payment receipts, correspondence with lawyers. She kept everything, like she wanted someone to find it eventually. Why didn't you tell me? Because, he laughed bitterly. Because I didn't want it to be true. Because it meant my entire life was a lie. I'm not a Thompson. I'm nobody. Just some kid she bought to replace the son she didn't want. She didn't replace me, I said. She tried to, but she couldn't. I'm still here, Daniel. I survived her. You know what that makes me? Strong. Stronger than she ever gave me credit for. Daniel looked at me, tears streaming down his face. I don't know who I am. My name isn't even real. Daniel Marcus Thompson. She made it up. My birth mother named me something else. Christopher James Parker. That was my name. For about 10 hours before Mom took me and erased Christopher Parker from existence. So what are you going to do? I asked. I don't know. The inheritance, it should probably be yours. Legally, Mom's will might not even be valid if the adoption was illegal. I looked around the house, at all the expensive furniture and art and trappings of wealth. I don't want it, I said, and as I spoke the words, I realized they were true. I don't want any of it. This house, this money, it's all built on lies. It's poisoned. Then what do we do? I thought about it for a long moment. You keep the inheritance. Use it to find out who you really are. Track down your birth mother if you can. Find the truth about Christopher Parker. And maybe we try to be brothers for real this time. Not the roles Mom wrote for us. Just two people who share a history and are trying to figure out what comes next. Daniel wiped his eyes. You really don't hate me? After everything? I'm angry, I admitted. I'm furious at Mom for what she did to both of us. But you? You were a baby. You didn't choose any of this. You were a victim, too. She used you as a weapon against me, and she used me as a cautionary tale for you. We both lost. Over the next few months, Daniel did exactly what I'd suggested. He hired a private investigator, a real one this time, and started unraveling the mystery of Christopher Parker. He found his birth mother living in Oregon, remarried with 3 children. The reunion was awkward and emotional, but she welcomed him with open arms, thrilled to meet the son she'd thought she'd never see again. As for James Carver, we never did figure out who he was. Daniel found a check in our mother's records, dated the week before she died, made out to J. Carver Consulting Services for $10,000. The bank confirmed it had been cashed, but the trail ended there. Our mother had hired him for that one specific task: deliver the envelope after the will was read, and then he'd vanished like smoke. Harold Finch called me one day to inform me that, given the circumstances, I had grounds to contest the will. The adoption had been illegal, which meant Daniel's legal status as our mother's son could be challenged. The entire inheritance could be tied up in court for years. I told Harold I wasn't interested. The house, the money, the stocks and bonds and art collection, I wanted none of it. Daniel could have it all. He needed it more than I did, needed the security while he figured out who Christopher Parker was and how to reconcile that identity with the Daniel Thompson he'd been raised to be. Are you sure? Harold asked me. Your mother's estate is worth over $5 million. You're walking away from a significant fortune. I'm walking away from her version of success, I corrected him, and toward my own. Rachel threw me a small dinner party the night everything was finalized. Just a few friends, some wine, a home-cooked meal. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just good people who'd chosen to be in my life. So what now? Rachel asked as we cleaned up the dishes later. What does Michael Thompson do with his freedom? I thought about the question. For 36 years, I'd defined myself in relation to my mother's disappointment and Daniel's success. I was the failure, the disappointment, the one who hadn't measured up. But now those definitions had been revealed as the lies they always were. I keep teaching, I said. I keep showing up for my students. I keep living honestly. I don't need to be rich or powerful or impressive. I just need to be real. That's very zen of you, Rachel said with a smile. Mom spent her whole life constructing elaborate lies. She lied about Daniel's birth, lied about my worth, lied to herself about what mattered, and in the end, what did all those lies get her? 2 sons who barely knew who they were, and a fortune that couldn't buy her happiness or absolution. I picked up the photograph, the one that had started everything. The baby in the blue blanket, 2 months old, not yet named Daniel, still just Christopher Parker with his whole life ahead of him. She wanted me to ask him who he really was, I said, but the real question was who I really was. And now I know. I'm the one who survived. I'm the one who stayed honest. I'm the one who didn't need her approval to know my own worth. Rachel raised her wine glass. To surviving. To surviving, I echoed. A few weeks later, Daniel called me. I'm selling the house, he said. I can't live there. Too many ghosts. Too many lies embedded in the walls. I'm moving to Oregon to be closer to my birth family. My biological mother, she wants me to meet my half-siblings. I have a sister. Her name is Emma. That's good, I said, and I meant it. That's really good, Daniel. Christopher, he corrected gently. I'm going by Christopher now. My birth mother, she cries every time she calls me that. She says she never got to use the name she gave me. I want her to have that, to have me back, even if it's 36 years late. Christopher, I repeated. It suits you. Thanks. And Michael, I'm setting up a trust. Half of everything Mom left me, I'm putting it in an education trust. You were right about using the money to do something good. I want to fund scholarships for adopted kids, kids in foster care, kids who need someone to believe in them. She would have hated that, I said. I know. Christopher laughed, and it sounded genuine. Not the practice laugh of Daniel Thompson, but something rawer and more real. That's part of why I'm doing it. But mostly I'm doing it because it feels right. Because those kids deserve a chance, just like we deserved better than what we got. After we hung up, I walked to my bookshelf and pulled down a photo album I hadn't looked at in years. My own childhood pictures, the ones I'd kept. Page after page of a serious little boy, trying so hard to be good enough, smart enough, worthy enough. A boy who never realized that the game was rigged from the start. I found a picture of myself at 5 years old, holding up a drawing I'd made of our family. In the picture, I was smiling, proud of my work. I remembered that day vaguely. I'd worked for hours on that drawing, carefully coloring in each figure. My mother had looked at it and said, "Why is Daniel bigger than me? That's not how it is." She'd thrown the drawing away. But my father had rescued it from the trash and kept it. After he died, I'd found it among his things and saved it. I looked at that 5-year-old boy, at his hopeful smile, and felt a wave of sadness and love. He'd deserved better. We'd both deserved better. But we'd survived. I took the photograph from the funeral, the baby in the blue blanket, and placed it in the album next to my childhood pictures. Christopher Parker and Michael Thompson, both just trying to figure out who they were beneath the identities that had been forced upon them. "We made it," I said quietly to the photographs. "We're free." That night, I dreamed of my mother for the first time since the funeral. In the dream, she was sitting in her pristine living room, the one that no longer existed because Christopher was selling the house. She looked at me, and for once, there was no disappointment in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. I woke up before I could respond, which was probably for the best, because I didn't know if I could forgive her. Maybe someday, maybe never. But I was learning that forgiveness wasn't a requirement for freedom. I could acknowledge what she'd done, recognize the damage it had caused, and still move forward with my life. The truth had set me free. Not the inheritance, not the vindication, not the revelation of Christopher's adoption. Just the simple truth that I'd always been enough, even when she couldn't see it. 6 months after the funeral, I got a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note. "Your mother hired me to deliver the photograph because she couldn't face telling you the truth herself. She was a coward in many ways, but in her final weeks, she found a small amount of courage. She wanted you to know that you were her son, her real son, the one who carried her blood and her stubbornness and her capacity for survival. She said you were the strongest person she'd ever known, and she'd spent your whole life punishing you for it, because it reminded her of her own weakness. She died knowing she'd failed you, and she hoped that someday you might understand that the inheritance she left your brother was the final lie, and the photograph was the first truth she'd told you in 30 years. She loved you. She just didn't know how to show it without diminishing you." James Carver. I read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in the album next to the photographs. The words should have brought me comfort, should have provided closure, but they just made me sad. Sad for her, sad for Christopher, sad for all of us trapped in her web of lies and expectations. But sadness wasn't the same as defeat. I'd spent my whole life being sad, being diminished, being less than. Now I was something else. I was free, I was whole, I was enough. And that was the greatest inheritance of all. I called Christopher that evening. "Hey," I said when he answered. "Want to grab dinner tomorrow? There's this new restaurant near my place. Nothing fancy, just good food." "Yeah," Christopher said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Yeah, I'd like that, brother." "Brother," I repeated, and for the first time in our lives, the word meant something real. The restaurant was a small Italian place that had opened up in my neighborhood, the kind of family-run establishment where the owner knew half the customers by name and the menu changed based on what was fresh. We sat in a corner booth, ordered more food than we could possibly eat, and talked. "I've been thinking about the trust fund," Christopher said between bites of lasagna. "The education fund for adopted kids and foster youth. I want to expand it, make it national. Use most of the inheritance, actually. Keep enough to live comfortably, but pour the rest into something that actually matters." "Mom would have hated that," I observed. "I know." He grinned, and it was genuine, not the practiced smile of Daniel Thompson, but something rawer and more real. "That's part of why I'm doing it. But mostly I'm doing it because those kids deserve a chance. They deserve to know they're valued, that they matter, that their circumstances don't define their worth. Everything I didn't know until I was 36 years old." "What are you going to call it?" I asked. "The Parker Foundation, after Sarah, after the name she gave me, the name that should have been mine all along." He paused, pushing pasta around his plate. "I'm flying to Oregon next month to meet her. Emma, too, my half-sister, Sarah's daughter. I have a sister, Michael, a real sister who doesn't even know I exist yet." "That's incredible. Are you nervous?" "Terrified," he admitted. "What if she hates me? What if seeing me just brings back all the trauma of giving me up? What if I'm a disappointment, just like I was to Eleanor?" He caught himself. "I can't call her mom anymore. That word doesn't fit. She wasn't a mother to either of us, not really. She was a manipulator playing with human lives." "You won't be a disappointment," I said firmly. "You're not going there as Daniel Thompson, golden child and heir. You're going as Christopher Parker, a man trying to understand where he came from. That's honest. That's real. And Sarah will see that." "Will you come with me?" he asked suddenly. "I know it's a lot to ask, but I need someone there who knows the whole story. Someone who understands what this means. I didn't even hesitate. Of course. The trip to Oregon took place on a sunny Saturday in late June, 6 months after the funeral that had started everything. We flew into Portland and drove to Eugene, through forests and mountains that felt like another world compared to the urban sprawl we'd grown up in. Sarah Mitchell lived in a modest neighborhood full of craftsman houses with well-tended gardens. Her house was yellow with white trim, a porch swing gently moving in the breeze, flowers blooming in careful beds along the walkway. It looked like a home, not a showpiece. It looked lived in and loved. Christopher sat in the rental car for a full 5 minutes before getting out, staring at the house like it might disappear if he blinked. "You ready?" I asked. "No, but let's do it anyway." We walked up the path together. Before Christopher could knock, the door opened. Sarah Mitchell stood there, and the resemblance was immediate and striking. She had Christopher's eyes, the same shape of his face, the same way of standing, with shoulders slightly hunched as if trying to take up less space in the world. "Christopher," she breathed, and her eyes filled with tears. "Sarah," he said, and then she pulled him into a hug that looked like it was 36 years in the making. I stood back, giving them space, watching this reunion that my mother's death had made possible. And I realized something. My mother's final act, leaving me that photograph, might have been the only truly loving thing she'd ever done for me. Not because of the inheritance or the vindication, but because it had given me the truth. And the truth had set both Christopher and me free. After the initial reunion, there were many tears, much laughter, endless questions. We spent the day with Sarah and her family. Her husband David was a gentle, quiet man who worked as a high school teacher. Their daughter Emma was 28, a nurse practitioner who looked at Christopher with undisguised fascination and kept saying, "I have an older brother. I can't believe I have an older brother." As the sun set and we sat on Sarah's back deck, surrounded by the warmth of a family that had welcomed Christopher without hesitation, I thought about how far we'd come. From that funeral reception, standing in the back corner alone and invisible, to this moment of connection and healing. "Thank you," Christopher said to me later that night, back at our hotel. "For everything. For believing me when I was confused, for helping me find the truth, for coming here with me. I couldn't have done any of this alone." "You're not alone," I said. "Not anymore. Neither of us are." 2 months later, Christopher officially changed his name. Not legally erasing Daniel Thompson. That name still existed on legal documents, on the inheritance papers, on all the official records of the lie my mother had told. But in his daily life, with Sarah and Emma, with David and his newfound family, with friends and colleagues who mattered, he was Christopher Parker. The name his birth mother had given him. The name he should have had all along. He sold our mother's house at the end of summer. The Persian rugs, the crystal chandelier, the expensive artwork, all sold at auction. The proceeds went to the Parker Foundation, which officially launched in September with enough funding to provide full scholarships to 200 students in its first year. Eleanor Marie Thompson's legacy, Christopher said at the foundation's launch event, was meant to be one of wealth and status and family prestige. Instead, her legacy will be helping young people who, like me, started life with circumstances beyond their control. That seems like the right kind of justice. I stood in the audience that night, watching my brother, my real brother, speak with confidence and purpose about building something meaningful from the ashes of our mother's lies, and I felt something I'd never expected to feel: gratitude. Not for the years of pain and dismissal and being made to feel inadequate, but for surviving them, for becoming someone who knew their own worth independent of her approval, for learning that the truest success wasn't measured in money or inheritance or being the favorite child. It was measured in integrity, in honesty, in the courage to face uncomfortable truths and choose to be better than what you'd been taught. The last time I saw Harold Finch was at a coffee shop downtown, 3 months after Christopher's foundation launch. He approached my table hesitantly, looking older and grayer than I remembered. "Michael," he said. "May I sit for a moment?" I gestured to the empty chair. "I wanted to apologize," he said without preamble. "I knew. About the adoption, about the illegality of it, about everything. Your mother made me complicit in the lie, and I allowed it because she paid me well, and I told myself it wasn't my place to judge. But I should have done something, should have told someone, should have protected you both from her manipulations." I looked at this man who had held my family's secrets for decades, who had profited from silence, and I felt nothing. No anger, no need for his apology. "It's done," I said simply. The truth came out eventually. It always does. "Still, I'm sorry, for what it's worth." He stood to leave, then paused. "She did love you, you know. In her way, she just didn't know how to show it without controlling it, without twisting it into something that served her needs. That photograph she left you? It was her only act of courage in 40 years of cowardice. After he left, I thought about his words. Did I believe my mother had loved me? I didn't know. Maybe she had, in some stunted, incomplete way. Maybe the best she could do was leave me a cryptic photograph and let the truth speak for itself. It didn't matter anymore. A year after the funeral, Christopher invited me to Thanksgiving at Sarah's house in Oregon. It had become a tradition, the Parker Mitchell Thompson family gathering, an unlikely combination of people brought together by tragedy and choice and the decision to be more than the lies that had tried to define them. Around Sarah's table, laughing and passing dishes and telling stories, I realized this was what family was supposed to feel like. Not performance or competition or conditional love based on meeting impossible standards. Just people choosing each other, day after day, in all their imperfect humanity. "What are you grateful for this year?" Emma asked as we went around the table, following their family tradition. When it came to me, I looked at Christopher, at the brother I'd gained by losing everything I'd thought was family, and said, "I'm grateful for the truth, for discovering that I was always enough, even when someone tried to convince me I wasn't, and for learning that the family you choose matters more than the family you're born into." Christopher raised his glass. "I'll drink to that." We all did. Later that evening, after the dishes were done and the house had settled into comfortable quiet, Christopher and I sat on Sarah's porch swing, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. "Do you ever wish it had been different?" he asked. "That Mom had been different? That we could have had this growing up instead of everything we got instead?" I thought about it carefully. Sometimes, but then I think about who we became because of it. You're running a foundation that's changing hundreds of lives. I'm teaching kids that their worth isn't determined by other people's opinions. We survived her, Christopher. We survived and became better than she ever was. That's not nothing. "No," he agreed. "That's not nothing." The truth had cost us both dearly. Years of pain, damaged identities, relationship scars that would probably never fully heal, but it had also given us something my mother's money never could, the freedom to be ourselves, fully, honestly, without apology. As we sat there in the gathering darkness, two brothers who had found each other through the ruins of our mother's lies, I felt something that had been absent my entire childhood, a peace. Not because everything was perfect, not because the pain had vanished or the past had been rewritten, but because I finally understood that my worth had never been dependent on her approval. I had always been enough. I had always mattered. The photograph, that single image of a baby in a blue blanket with my mother's cryptic message on the back, sat in a frame on my bookshelf now. Not as a reminder of her betrayal, but as a reminder that even in death, even after a lifetime of choosing cruelty and control, she had given me one final gift, the truth.